Well, thank you all. You had an introduction to a few mayors yesterday, and we know how much mayors matter, and we wanted to have another session today. We are delighted to have Mayor Bryan Barnett with us today. He is the mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan. It's the city's longest-serving mayor. And importantly, he also is the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, where he works with fellow mayors across the country. Will be able to give us kind of some insights on how mayors are thinking a little bit about the election that we just had, and some of the issues that he is facing in his own community and across the country. We're going to move to questions pretty quickly so that we have an opportunity to hear from everybody in the room. So please think about a question you want to ask one of the leading mayors in this country, somebody who has been a great supporter of livable communities. And with that, I want to just turn it to Mayor Barnett and ask him to tell us initially a little bit about his city, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm always a little hesitant about an introduction that says, let's have a lively talk about politics a week after a midterm election. So those initial questions you wrote, throw those away. We'll get to the second set of questions. Listen, I love being a mayor. I think it's the best job in the world. I've been blessed to be the mayor of the city of Rochester Hills for the past 12 years. When I first was elected, I was the youngest mayor in the country of a city over 50,000. Now, I could celebrate an AARP type milestone as I'm the longest serving mayor in my city's history. Won my last election as a write-in candidate in Michigan's largest write-in win in our state's history. So I have found a job that I'm passionate about and I really enjoy. And my city, I don't imagine all of you have been there, though I describe it as the most beautiful place that most of you haven't visited yet. Rochester Hills is about 15 miles north of the city of Detroit, a beautiful suburb. We're a community of great opportunity. We have two universities in our city. We have a vibrant senior center. We're often recognized as one of the, both Money Magazine, USA Today ranked us one of the top 10 places to live and raise a family. And so Michigan's safest city the last 3 years. I talked about that investment we make in our seniors. We have really the state of Michigan, maybe the Midwest's most vibrant senior center. It has a terrible name. It's the OPC, the Older Person Center. But it's about, I didn't name it, but it's about 100,000 square feet, and every day in a city of 75,000 people, about 1,200 people go through the door. And so you can tell that it is a dynamic driver in our community. And so it's a privilege to be here and to represent my city. Additionally, in my role as Vice President of the United States Conference of Mayors, I work with many of your mayors across the country on issues of largely making our cities better places to live for our residents. I work closely with one of your region's mayors here, Columbia Mayor Steve Benjamin, and I have, wow, Steve Benjamin's mom's in the crowd. That's good. He's a buddy of mine. He's would have been here, of course, you know Nancy, but we had to divide and conquer. He's speaking in Montgomery, Alabama today. But the U.S. Conference of Mayors briefly is focused on three things this year, and we've done something unique. I don't know if any of you, like I, am tired of the hyper-bipartisanship that you see, or the hyper-partisanship you see in just about every layer of government. So we decided to do something different. Steve is a Democratic mayor from the South. I'm a Republican mayor from the North. We decided to work together for 2 years, find a joint program that we believed in. We're focused on the three I's: innovation, infrastructure, and inclusion. And mayors across the country are working laser-like focused on those three initiatives.
Yeah. We did a lot of polling during this election, and most people know because we've reported the tremendous interest in healthcare. But the leading item in our polling was, among our members, the grave concern about how divisive politics had become. And it really surprised us how strong a showing that was. I was wondering if you might say a little bit more about that in terms of particularly the agenda, the three I's, and how you and your fellow mayors are looking at the divisions that exist, not only in the country, but probably in some of your cities as well.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we have election and probably partisanship fatigue.
Yeah.
You want to get a room to applaud. You say, listen, I'm going to present some legislation that limits the amount of political advertising, mailing, and commercials you can see prior to election, and we all rise as one, right? It was a long election, especially those of you that live in battleground states. In my state in particular, we had a lot of attention in congressional races. It really is, I think, something that we can take away here as leaders of local communities and involved in local communities. It really is the age of the local government and the age of the mayor. And you don't have to, you might say, okay, well, Mayor Barnett's saying that. Of course, he would say that. But you look at where things are happening, and you look at perhaps like social issues. Maybe the way things in the past used to be, well, you'd involve some special interests and you'd take your issue to Washington and you'd fight for change. But I think there's so much, I think, lack of trust that anything will happen in Washington that people now take those issues and work them from the ground up. So you see, minimum wage didn't pass federally. You look at it, cities in California like San Francisco and Seattle and other places on the West Coast that led moving minimum wage, and then states followed cities' leads. You look at some of the environmental issues. Similarly, you don't go to Washington to get plastic straws banned. You go to different communities that do those things first, and then states pick up what local cities are doing. So the action is in local government. The action is with the cities, and I think the reason the action is there, Nancy, is something that we all have that's a tremendous competitive advantage that we must recognize and leverage. And that is that we have the trust of the people we represent. Yeah. And that can't be understated. You look at some of the numbers that suggest that trust in the federal government, Congress's favorability usually hovers between 15 and 20%. State legislatures is usually in the 30s. Local government is in the 60s. And that means that people trust us to make decisions to move our communities forward. And not only are residents recognizing that, but special interest groups are recognizing that. And that's why you see more and more things happening and really beginning at the local level. And that's the other thing I would say to that is, I think the reason we have a lot of the trust is that we are able to cut through a lot of that partisanship. Most of your mayors don't run as Republicans or Democrats, although most folks know what they are. They're working with neighboring communities and all in hopes to get them some things done to improve the quality of life for our residents.
Most mayors have a very substantial part of their constituency in that category of older Americans, seniors, however we want to refer to them. Can you tell me how you look at that population and also how you reach out to be sure you're hearing what they think? We know from our own experience that seniors are not reluctant to pick up the phone and give you insights when they don't agree with you. But I know that you and other mayors are focused not only on what they don't agree with you on, but also on their concerns. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about how you see this very large group in most cities.
Yeah. Well, you say seniors, and my first thought goes, I'm blessed to represent my mom and my grandma in my city, and my grandma is quick to tell me, Bryan, you looked fat yesterday. I didn't like that outfit. So grandma's past the filter stage, and it's always wonderful, refreshing, unfiltered information I get from my grandma. But our senior population in Rochester Hills in particular, because of the senior center that we have, that the narrative around our seniors is really positive. And I personally believe, our seniors have really fought and invested in my generation a lot, and now it's time for my generation and our generation to fight and invest in them. And what that looks like in our city, one person appreciated that. I'm sure there's more. What that looks like in my city is supporting their efforts. Listen, you can do that in a couple ways. The way I see it happening in my city, of course, is our community supports the efforts of the OPC in tremendous ways. We do a tremendous amount of events there. We recognize that as an asset. But the private sector recognizes it also, because most of the development that's happening in my city are senior-focused developments. The housing components that seniors are demanding and asking for, single-floor developments, close, walkable communities, and they're recognizing it with their dollars. They're saying that this is what people want in Rochester Hills, and so we're building it. So, listen, I view our senior community as a tremendous resource. The number one entrepreneurial group in Metro Detroit is those over 55. You have a lot of folks that have spent 20 25, 30, 35 years working for the auto companies, and they retire at 60 and they start consulting firms or engineering firms, and they do a tremendous amount of value add in our cities. And so we recognize them as an outstanding resource and try to leverage them and engage with them as much as possible.
Oh, great. And we know that for a fact. We've worked with you on many projects. When we talk to mayors, they tell us all the time that they like conferences, they like going to the U.S. Conference of Mayors because they're able to hear what other mayors are doing and able to steal ideas. So my question is, who do you like to steal ideas from? There have to be a set of mayors or a set of cities that you kind of keep an eye on, and I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, well, mayors are great at stealing. I actually stole Nancy's purse on the way up here. I noticed when I landed today that yesterday I passed a sign that said we're in Pepsi country, and I don't imagine that Pepsi and Coke call each other and say, hey, we just found a great new distribution model. You should really look into this in South America. It's really working for us. In local government, you can do that because Charlotte's success isn't necessarily at Rochester Hill's expense. And many communities are like that. So yeah, there are some big things that you hear, competitions about. Of course, we all followed Amazon and their announcement yesterday, and there is some level of competition, but in large measure, a region's success, a rising tide raises all boats, and so we're working to try to improve, again, the overall livability of our cities and the quality of life. Who do I steal from? I look at mayors that are experts in their fields. There are some mayors that are really sharp at communication. I think Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles has some really unique social media skills and tools that he deploys. I was with him this past weekend with a few other mayors. He's kind of recognized for that. There are some mayors that just do some more project-based, and you'd be surprised. Ideas don't have a partisan R or D after them, and so we worked really closely, collaboratively to find those things. And I hope some folks steal ideas from me. We've done some really unique things with the environment, with recycling in our city, and I think that's one of the great things. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and I would encourage all of you. You come to these conferences, and 50% is what you hear from speakers on the stage, but 50% is what you talk about at the bar later and at the restaurant and at lunch, and those are the ideas. How does that deploy in your community? How much did that cost? Who actually runs that in your organization? Those are really good things to learn because there are some people out there that are most likely doing what you're trying to do and have a little bit of a head start.
Any mayors are real clunkers to you? No, I'm just teasing. I wanted you to be happy about the other questions I asked.
It's all confidential, right? If I say who I don't like.
We've talked about this before, and a few of us were able to talk about it last night. We're all fascinated by technology, and at one extreme, a lot of people think technology is the answer to almost every problem we have. To the other extreme, you have a lot of our constituents who are terrified of some technology. I wonder if you might talk a little bit from the point of view of a mayor, and especially in the transportation space, where we have Uber and Lyft and ride sharing and autonomous vehicles, where I know you have been a leader, just kind of as a mayor, how you think about technology, and especially with the senior population.
Sure. I think one of the most important jobs that I have as mayor, and maybe hopefully your mayors feel the same way, is we have to look at where we want to go as a community, what's coming ahead. And so while we certainly are managing things, at least my strategy and my team is you hire great people, let them manage what's going on today. And my job is to get out there in 5-10 years and see what's happening. What do I want to bring to my community? How do I want to position Rochester Hills as a leader? We're in Metro Detroit, and so much of our past has been built around the auto industry. And as we look to move from the automobile industry into the more broadly defined mobility industry, we really want to be leaders there. Technology is fantastic. It is going to allow for some amazing barriers to be broken. And so I love talking about technology. I love talking about especially autonomous vehicles all across the country. I've written in a few publications, national publications, about it because I believe it's going to be the great disruptor of the next decade. And that brings fear to some people, but it also brings great opportunity. I think about specifically my job as mayor. A lot of it is just to begin conversations. So we had the AARP in town last week, the day before the election, and we held a session for our community seniors. About 100 came, and we talked about autonomous vehicles because for some folks, they're excited. For other folks, this is a Jetsons type thing that will never actually happen, and it's for our kids and grandkids. But you think about how much has changed, recently, how fast technology moves, and even you think about what we were saying 20 years ago. We said two things: don't meet people on the internet, and don't get into a stranger's car. Right? And now we literally summon strangers to our locations and we jump in a stranger's car, right? So those things are changing, and they're not waiting for government to get it right or for government to figure it all out. Those technologies are being driven. So our job is to have those conversations. And I remember in Rochester Hills when we introduced roundabouts into our community. Now this is not major technology, but my gosh, you would have thought, I was a communist socialist coming to take the kids and grandkids, and this was the great end of our community. And we had to educate people on how to drive roundabouts, not just seniors, but our whole entire community. And now when you talk about the opportunities for AV, autonomous vehicles, that's another thing where we need to begin to educate people on the possibilities. Moving people from, oh my gosh, I would never get into a car without a driver, to the stat that you mentioned earlier that we know we're going to live 10 years past our ability to drive. Yeah. So we talk in public transportation about the last mile being so important. It's time to start talking about the last decade of public transportation being important and the ability to make sure that we have those mobility options. One of the most poignant moments of our session last week, Nancy, was when a woman stood up who was blind with her cane and said, I have one question: how soon can I get in one of these vehicles, and will there be technology to tell me when I'm driving by? Yeah. And you talk and you see pretty quickly about how autonomous vehicles will help not only the senior population, but the disabled population, maybe those in your communities that have less means. Two-car families might go to one. Families that don't have the opportunity for a vehicle might be able to share. There is tremendous, tremendous opportunity, and it excites me as a mayor. I hope it excites you, because these technologies are coming, and it's our job to prepare our communities for the different opportunities that I think autonomous vehicles in particular will bring.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Doug Dickerson, who has questions from all of you, and please send in more.
Mic on? So on that same theme of technology, this question is, I heard that Rochester Hills is the robotic capital of the world.
Yes. Please
share what they do.
Yes. Well, there's tremendous frustration. I'm guessing that question came from Ann Arbor, Michigan, which we consider a second-tier city in Michigan. We are known when mayors travel all over the globe, and you try to have a one-sentence thing. We're the chocolate capital, we're the sunshine capital, we're the whatever it might be. In our city, more robots are made and produced than any other city in North America. So we are the robotic capital of our continent, and I appreciate my friends from Ann Arbor for planting that question, because I give them no credit. No, it describes in a brief sentence the fact that we're auto-focused. And that we are education focused, and that our residents appreciate that and want to contribute, and also that it requires me to be able to look at and say, listen, we're looking at technology now, next generation technology. I need to be looking at what's happening in the future.
We're going to keep questions from the audience, so please send them in.
Next question is, what is the best way that we can reach mayors across the country with our livable message?
Yeah. Well, hopefully you have a receptive audience. I mean, it's a topic, obviously we're very familiar with it in our city. There's great consistency in message between what the AARP is attempting to do and what all of you are trying to do, and what mayors are trying to do that might not know specifically about the Livable Communities program. We're trying to communicate with residents, we're trying to make improve the quality of lives for our citizens, and those things there's a great alignment. And so obviously, to me, when I'm presented with something and I want to know how it impacts folks, I want to know obviously the details, what's it going to cost, how are we going to implement it, how is this going to be deployed. But ultimately, if the end game is something that aligns with my message, and that's why I love being here and supporting what AARP is doing, it comes right alongside what mayors are attempting to do, which is improve the lives of every single citizen in their communities. And I think that's why hopefully that should be met with very receptive ears.
Great.
Mayor, this is the question that everybody has on their mind right now. It's probably the most interesting question. Bobby Nicholas, can you do a tight focus? Where did you get those socks?
Well, among all the things I've said so far today, it's also extremely important to have strong sock game. One strong takeaway from today's session, sock game.
Hashtag
I belong to a
sock
couple
game.
sock of the month clubs, actually, so I have no idea where these ones came from.
Thank you, Mayor. Next question is, how do you handle a mayor who doesn't want to address senior issues?
Well, that's a mayor that I don't think will be around long. If you're being strictly pragmatic as a mayor, you should know that your senior population votes 15 times more regularly than just about any other population. I don't understand that thinking. I would have to assume that maybe there's some other subset reason that there's maybe something in the background there, a millage request or something that must drive that. But my gosh, every single metric that you are all very familiar with, even more so familiar than I am, suggests that our communities are aging, that aging in place is an extreme priority for the people that live in our communities. They grew up with their kids in the school district, they know where the parks are, they're comfortable with their doctor and their shopping, and they don't want to have to move to Shady Oaks, 30 miles away. They want to be able to stay and age in their community. And so for mayors like myself, that is a tremendous resource. People that value your community, you don't want to lose them. And so finding ways to engage them and engage their interest and again, engaging in collaborative ways, the private sector to build the type of housing, to look from your city council standpoints, to look at public transportation, walkability, and the kind of activities and events that your communities are hosting are all critically important. A mayor that isn't tuned into that, this is a short-term gig.
Keep going. Again, send in your questions.
Mayor, climate change has become a clear issue that matters to cities, but a political hot button. How can mayors and AARP lead the conversation for nonpartisan climate change action?
Yeah. Well, now we're getting to the challenging question. As I mentioned earlier, I think that people are recognizing that any kind of action that happens relative to most significant change, be they social or environmental, is probably now going to start at the local level. I don't know. To me, very little changed on Tuesday. My community didn't change. Our interests that are important to my residents, they didn't wake up and go, "Wow, the Democrats control the House. This is completely new, and we don't need this road paved anymore." Everything that we were focused on prior to Tuesday still remains important to our community, and issues of climate are incredibly important. As the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, part of my job is to travel throughout the course of the year wherever there are challenges. I was in California last week with the fires after the hurricanes. Our team went to Houston, we went to Key West, we went to Miami, and we talked to those mayors there, mostly at the time about recovery efforts, but also talking about the effects of climate that it has in our cities. Mayor Levine, former Mayor Levine of Miami Beach, is quick to point out and gives a great tour about how climate change is changing the look of Miami Beach, given the fact that it floods and there's tremendous challenges with ocean creep. I think the question is challenging. There's always a bit of partisanship that can sneak in. But the farther you can get at the local level in advancing these issues, the better. Because, again, many times when we come together, it's related to protecting Miami Beach, it's related to advancing Rochester Hills, it's to protecting the hills of California. And it's not about what's happening in Washington, where if I win as a Democrat, you lose as a Republican. Or to get you to move, you have to admit something that's going to hurt your base. Which is why I think, as I said at the beginning, more attention on social and environmental issues is being focused on the mayors. The mayors, after the United States, and I'm a Republican, pulled out of the Paris Agreement. Many mayors signed up and to commit to it. My city doubled down on our recycling efforts. We went from being one of the worst recycling communities in Michigan to now we're the #1 recycling community in Michigan, way better than Ann Arbor, Michigan. Just thought I'd throw that in. And we did that not because it was a partisan thing, but it made sense for our community. I mean, it just made sense for our community. So I think the way you take those issues down to what benefits your residents and take them out of that hyper-partisan atmosphere where there has to be winners and has to be losers is something that's being recognized by activist groups and citizens who actually want to see real change.
Yeah.
And now for your double jeopardy question. How are livable cities coping with the increase of about a third more than last year on hate crimes?
Yeah. Well, one of the 3 I's that we talked about that we're focused on, and the reason that I'm so proud to work with Mayor Benjamin on these topics is because no matter your city, north, south, east, west, big, small, rural, suburban, urban, innovation, infrastructure, and inclusion are the issues that I promise you're going to be working on. And when you talk about inclusion, inclusion can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It could mean obviously where most of us go immediately because of some of the hate crimes. You go to ethnicity and you think about some of the hate crimes that we're familiar with. Our conference right now is meeting in Montgomery, and last night they toured some of the areas that we just started a new institute on compassionate cities, trying to recognize the importance of compassion and kindness as it relates to inclusion. When you talk about inclusion, it doesn't have to necessarily mean ethnicities. It can mean economic inclusion. It can mean so many different things. It can mean technological inclusion, as we've talked about the need to get technology to all aspects and all corners of our communities. And so, listen, this is something that matters. This is not a political issue. This is talking about finding every single person in your community finding value and feeling accepted in your community. And the times that are spent on that, although they're maybe not as easy to point to as an economic development gain or a new business moving to town or a particular ribbon cutting on something, but they're creating and they're helping to establish the fabric of your community. I just started. My community is 79% white, but we recognize that we need to be on the front edge of a changing demographic regionally, and so I started an inclusion and diversity committee. It's starting to have that conversation that I talked about earlier, because it's really important to understand that everyone in your community needs to feel valued, and our community in Rochester Hills is going to look a little different in a few years than it does now, and I want to be and make sure our teams are prepared for that, and the people that we have on the ground responding are reflective of that change.
Mayor, what advice would you give small town mayors to how to move beyond the daily rigor of getting potholes filled, garbage picked up, and stormwater when budgets are so tight and we have a limited tax base?
Yeah. Well, that's not small town mayors only. I mean, my town is 75,000, and I sit with mayors that are 10 times the size of my city all the time, and I go from being the big town to the small town. And the funny thing I realize is that we all have the same problems. We all have to pick up trash. We all have, a few crazy residents that want to take you down a wormhole. We have to stay focused. We all want to create jobs. We all want to position our cities for success. We're all really proud of our communities, so we want to win and lead in certain areas. And so I don't think those are issues that are particular to, and we all have budgets too. I mean, all of us, no one I don't think has unlimited funding. So we have to make decisions based on priorities. And so I guess the answer to that question is, to me it always comes back to the residents. With limited funding, with limited time, with limited bandwidth, just as an individual, you better be tuned into your constituents to find out what they need and what they want. And my personal philosophy, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is I feel as the mayor, I need to be a little bit of the visionary. I need to kind of be creating where we want to go. And I also have to be, tomorrow I have to turn the Christmas tree on at the city of Rochester Hills. I have to have open office hours. I have to take calls from seniors and talk about, the newspaper that didn't get delivered. And those things are really important because people expect a mayor to do and deliver on those. But I also have to make sure I'm creating time, that I'm meeting with my colleagues, that I'm reading publications that suggest where technology is going, where industry is going, because there's certainly questions that keep me up at night. Where will my people work? How will they get to work? What do I want my community to look like in 10 years? How do I remain competitive as the preeminent place to live, work, and raise your family in Southeast Michigan? And those are the things I think are important. And I think you tie back to the residents, and if they see that's what you're shooting for constantly in everything you're doing, they'll understand some weeks are less sexy than others. There are pothole filling weeks that are really important, but there's also time that you're trying to create and craft a message for your community, and I try to make sure I find time for both.
Mayor, the next question is, do you and other Conference of Mayors members, do you have a systematic approach to how the city government engages with citizens directly versus what you turn over to nonprofits to do? And then secondly is, do you just leave it to chance?
Do you just what?
Do you leave it to chance?
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I don't think there is I don't think there's an answer I can say, okay, here's the three things you do to engage your community. First this, second this. As I mentioned before, I think you always try to be in touch with your residents. That's the one thing often that's missing from public-private partnerships is the people, the other P, in making sure that you're never getting too far ahead. You can sometimes listen to nonprofits or listen to the business community, but if you're not tied in to what your residents are asking you to do and what they want to see for their community, those other things won't be successful. Listen, government does a lot of things well, but there's a lot of things we don't do well, and we need desperately the nonprofit communities to fill those gaps. So to me, the key here is collaboration. I mean, every situation generally starts with a good understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. If there's a great alignment between what a nonprofit wants to do and what your residents think is important, I think you work hand in hand to try to accomplish those. But in my experience in 12 years as mayor, most of these are a little different. Some of them are political. They have to be handled a little bit uniquely. Some of them are just triumphant wins that, they come together really magically and it's something that you talk about and celebrate together. But all these always, in my opinion, have to come back to the needs of your residents, which requires me as a mayor and all of you as members of local government agencies to be consistently asking, tied back to what your community wants to see and do and who they feel they are.
Mayor, this question is coming from the perspective of a nonprofit in the community. So what happens when you have a supportive mayor, but those in the department in the city aren't necessarily on board to implement?
Yeah. Well, that happens, and a lot of times there's conflict. I know that as generally as mayors, and you may be thinking of yours, and you may agree or disagree with this, mayors tend to be a little bit of idealists. They like to be visionaries, and oftentimes those that work in city government are taught, and rightfully so, to be a little bit risk adverse. I remember talking to my purchasing agent and saying, listen, how come we're not able to do these things? And she said, listen, my number one job is to keep you out of jail, which I can appreciate, and I've pushed it, but I get it. It reminded me that, their job is to make sure, so they have all these restrictions when it comes to purchasing. That was like, you must have 10 years of local government experience, you must be bonded at $38 trillion, you must have 15 references from communities that look like ours. And it eliminated all these other organizations. And so I'm like, man, why can't we use this company? They seem really cool. And so you had this sort of conflict that exists when you have a mayor that wants to try and do something different, and a system that isn't always structured to be, like I said, is structured to be risk adverse. So when a nonprofit has an idea, that's not uncommon, and I think it involves a process of communication and really a dialogue, a narrative that must be explained. Because when I said that, how come we can't do this? I really understood what my purchasing director was telling me. What she said made a lot of sense, and so what we started to do was look at things on a little bit of a case-by-case basis. Okay, in this situation, are we willing to take this risk? And I said, listen, I realized in that moment that I was the impediment to innovation in my organization. And so I said, listen, if this fails, this is on me, right? We're going to take this risk, and I will cover you, our team will cover you, and I'll let everyone know that this one's on me. And I think a little bit of that discussion to understand, perhaps in the specific example in which the author of this question was thinking of that, mitigating that risk in this particular instance may help move that thing forward. But it's important to understand that culture that exists oftentimes between a mayor and the part of city government that runs usually very effectively.
Thank you, Mayor. Next question is regarding housing. So you mentioned that there was developer investment in the 50-plus housing. So how much of that is attainable and affordable? And what are the strategies that you're using to make housing affordable for moderate to low-income residents?
Yeah. Well, that is a great question, and I've always sort of my personal philosophy is that the market often dictates, and usually it's not best for the government to get in and try to dictate the private sector. In affordable housing, it's a little bit different, and what we're trying to do in Rochester Hills is, first of all, understand the issue. I would tell you right now that if you came into my community and said, where's the affordable housing for seniors, I would really have a hard time showing you where that is. I would say, this is $1,800 a month as opposed to $2,500 a month, so that's our version of affordable housing. And we do have some areas of government assistance and a couple areas that are sort of sectioned out that allow for a little bit more, but it's government driven. I think we have to be more, I think we have to understand this is an issue that I know this conference has been working on in the time that you've been here. Affordable housing is probably the great challenge. Nancy was asking me earlier about the city of Detroit. I'm a huge fan of the city of Detroit. And what they're experiencing right now is tremendous rebirth and renaissance. If you haven't been to Detroit in the last 5 years, you should go. It's an amazing city that is really the hottest place in Michigan right now. But they're experiencing those same challenges where at once you could buy a whole block in the city of Detroit for $5,000. Now you can't get an apartment for $5,000. And so those are the challenges that you're seeing as more investments coming into a community. I don't have a great answer for that, except that, first of all, understanding the problem and talking about with your planning commissions, with your citizens, with your community, understanding that listen, maybe you're not a senior right now, but you're going to be. And if these were the choices that you had, would you be able to stay in our community? And many folks, would start to look at it a little bit differently than they do now, and hopefully make some different decisions. We are at the edge of that, trying to understand that issue right now, and definitely have a desire. It's in all of our, with my planning director, with our planning commission, that we want to create affordable options and a diversity of housing stock in our community. But a lot of times right now when the market is really good and you're at 3% unemployment and the business is booming, the private sector is driving and demanding a certain type of product, and they're willing to pay for it. So it's a continuing issue.
So Mayor, last question, and this I think is very fitting, back to the Motor City and kind of the engine of America's transportation. The question is, you mentioned the benefits of autonomous vehicles. So what are the infrastructure modifications that the city needs to consider and invest in?
Yeah. Well, so hold on to your hats on this one, because there's a lot of change that's coming. And I mentioned these just to skip across the surface. I mean, obviously, autonomous vehicles are going to require big data. So, there's a tremendous amount of discussion about broadband and 5G, and you think about an autonomous vehicle pulling out in front of another autonomous vehicle, and this vehicle has to read that vehicle, this vehicle has to speed up, this vehicle has to slow down. The amount of communication where everything's talking to everything else is incredible. You talk about, so certainly there's going to be infrastructure needs. Who's going to pay for those infrastructure needs? What about communities that are behind in the infrastructure needs? How will that work? Those things are all really interesting. You think about maybe you run a community, and this is something that sometimes people don't think about, but autonomous vehicles will have an impact on your budget too, right? Because if you're a community that depends on traffic tickets or parking meters, autonomous vehicles aren't going to speed. And so what would your city budget look like with a zeroed out line item for parking tickets or for speeding tickets, right? That's a little bit of a unique scenario. Parking garages may become an obsolete thing of the past. There's some great sustainability models and the environmental benefits of autonomous vehicles. The way we work, I mean, I think you're starting to see this probably in the next 12 months, that delivery jobs like floral delivery and pizza delivery and mail delivery to some extent may become more autonomous. And those jobs will go away, but jobs that have to do with AV technology and AV dispatchers and LiDAR and radar, those jobs will become increasingly important. All of these things are happening whether you leave this conference and do nothing or you leave this conference and get engaged. And so my challenge to you is to think about how those things impact your community. And the opportunities to embrace some of this change and lead on it. I want Rochester Hills to be the leader in Southeast Michigan when it comes to autonomous vehicles. I want my people to understand it. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them, when they go out, to be able to talk about it like they're authorities on the subject matter to their friends and neighbors. And when they're playing cards, when they're throwing darts, when they're playing pool, bowling on vacation, I want them to say, you know what, you ever thought about parking tickets? And I want them to be the leaders out there in that field. That's why I talk about it all the time, and I get excited about it, because I think it has the opportunity to make the lives of my residents much, much more rich, much, much more full, and to improve their quality of life and their experience living in my city.
Well, thank you. I don't know how suburban Maryland's going to pay for its wonderful schools without speed cameras and parking tickets, but we will see. I think you can all appreciate why we invited Mayor Barnett to be here today. We have worked closely with him, AARP, at the national level and also AARP Michigan, and we find he's been a great partner of ours. And one thing that's important in a partnership is he pushes us to think differently and to look at problems from a different point of view, and then to work together to try to find new approaches. We've appreciated our work in Michigan with you and also with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Look forward to June. You'll take over. We work very closely with Mayor Benjamin. South Carolina can clap now. And we've appreciated you taking time to be here. We know how busy you are, and I'm so glad everybody got to ask you the questions they were interested in. Not that my question about clunkers wasn't going to be very illuminating.
Meet me after. I've got a short list.
But it is really important to give opportunities for us to hear the kinds of questions folks who are around the room and most importantly around the country and communities everywhere want to ask. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your leadership, and join me in thanking you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.